This morning I am in Cambridge, Massachusetts, talking with Kim Dulin, who is the Associate Director for Collection Development and Digital Initiative of the Harvard Law School Library and the Director of the Harvard Library Innovation Lab. Kim, as is our custom, I'd like to sort of begin by having our viewers see you and learn about you as a person as opposed to a colleague, if that's all right. Maybe they're the same, but we all have private lives.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about your life, not only perhaps today, but even when you were younger?
Sure. I am originally from Iowa. I grew up in a very small town in Iowa, about 12,000 people. My father was a beer distributor, and my mother was, she worked a little bit on the side, but pretty much stay-at-home mom, took care of my sister and I. And I was a typical Midwestern kid, I think. I read a lot. My dad and my grandmother were very big readers, so I think that's, I sort of took after them. And I did all the things a typical kid did. Nothing spectacular or anything like that.
Before we talk about your professional credentials and your professional role, could we ask if you have any hobbies or other special passions that you occupy your time with? Of course, if the dean reads this, I'll say outside of work.
Outside of work, no. I'm a golfer, believe it or not. I've played golf since I was a kid, so I like to do that on the side. I've always been interested in art. That was my first love, true love, but ended up doing the law school thing instead, and so
You wanted to get paid for a living.
I wanted to get paid for a living, so I imagine once I quit working, I will go back and start doing some art again. So that's.
Well, eventually you will retire, and I recommend it strongly. It's a very, at least the early years are very pleasant things. Can we move into your professional
Sure.
aspects of your life? Could you talk about your degrees? I know you have 3.
Right.
Could you tell me what they are and where you earned each?
Yes, so actually my degrees are I have 2 degrees from Iowa and 1 from Illinois, but I originally started at Colorado State University, and I was going to be a forestry major. But that was kind of back in the day when everyone wanted to go to Colorado who grew up in the Midwest, and so I went out there, and I was there for about a year, and then I went back to Iowa. And I ended up changing my major, and I graduated with a BA in political science, which a lot of us pre-law people did. And then I worked in a library between my end of college and my beginning of law school. So I worked in the main library at the University of Iowa, and that's where I think I began to get the library bug, although I had been a shelver there as well, so I sort of had that library thing.
So you started really as a student assistant, I think you call them?
Yeah, and I was a really good shelver. I could shelve a cart of books faster than almost anyone. And they were on the shelf in good order.
So they were in the right places. They weren't just thrown here and there.
Exactly.
I could shelve it fast too, but it might be the sloppy way.
No, I was very good at that. And then, so then I went to the University of Iowa Law School and got my JD there. And then I practiced law for about 4 years down in the Ozarks in southwest Missouri, and I was a legal services attorney. And that really didn't. I loved my clients. I really loved my clients. I loved the work.
You could feel nice and warm and fuzzy about what you were doing.
And I felt like I was doing good work, although it was frustrating at times because it's tough for those people, But I didn't really love being a litigator. I didn't love the lawyer back and forth antagonism stuff. And I had always sort of had this interest in libraries, and so I thought maybe I'll go to library school. So I applied and I got into the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, and that's where I did my degree and got my MLS. And that was a really, really great experience. It was just a really good library school, and I think I've told you earlier that my assistantship there was in the American Association of Law Libraries archives. So I got to learn just a ton about law librarianship while I was there, and some of the most interesting information in those archives, and so it was a really good start.
Before we started the on-camera part of today, you asked me if my papers, when I was president of ALL, were in those archives, and I said, well, not that I'd sent any, although we did a lot, and headquarters had a lot of information, so maybe that's, some of those are there.
I bet some of them are there.
They probably are.
Yeah.
Scare me to go back and read them at this point, for sure. Or is it might scare anybody else reading them even more?
I don't think so.
Well, let's move on to your career. You basically have now dabbled in libraries. You've gotten your 3 degrees, and you're ready to be a real fully credentialed colleague.
Right.
And so you started off coming here to Boston.
Right.
And you were at the Pappas Law Library, Boston University, where you were a department head. Could you tell us a little bit about that position, what you did, and maybe anything you accomplished?
I hope I accomplished some things. I actually started at Pappas as just a regular old reference librarian. So I came on as their international law librarian at the time, and I had not even taken international law in school.
Yeah, that sounds like a bit of a gutsy appointment for both you and the director.
Dan Freeling was the director then, and he was lovely. Marlene Alderman was associate director, and they were just wonderful people. And I learned international law, and I did. I think I took the class there, and then I, did regular reference librarian duties. And after a couple of years there, one of the things that I did on the side was I taught in their legal writing program. And I ended up teaching in the legal writing program there for 10 years. Even after I left BU, I kept working there, and always really enjoyed that extra side of my life. And I think that a lot of us law librarians tend to end up doing things like that because we're in the law school. And
well, I hear even more and more of the teaching role of not just the head librarian, but many of the other librarians in the law libraries. It's become much more common than it was even a few years ago.
And we did teach, we did always teach the reference, the research side to the students too. And then I was promoted to become the head of the reference team there. And at that point, I'm trying to think of anything really big we did. We kind of rearranged our office so it worked better. But at that time, we were just beginning to use the internet. And I think it wasn't even it was the internet, but we were using, we had one computer between the 5 of us in an office. And that was really for ILL. So the reference assistant did that. And the rest of us didn't really, I don't even think we touched the computer. The students at BU were amazingly engaged with the librarians at that time. I think it was driven by the research and writing program too. They had a lot of work that they had to do in the library. So we had 2 reference desks going at certain points of the year just because it was so busy and there would be lines. So we were never at a loss for business. I also
saw you in class as a teacher.
And
maybe that helped cement the relationship with the library.
I mean, my students definitely did come to me more often, but it wasn't just, we were all busy, so.
Yeah. Well, I know I taught the whole time I was at American U, and it was a nice way to get to know students.
Oh, it's great.
As the director, I was back office most of the time. And
I
mean, they're different models, but that's the way it was.
You totally fall away from it. Once you go up to management, you get away from the students, which is too bad.
Yeah, it is, actually, but it's reality usually for everybody. Well, you were at the Pappas Law Library for about 10 years?
No, not that long. It was probably around 5.
About 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Then you went over to Northeastern. You stayed in town as the associate director.
Right.
When about did you make that move?
That was around, I had to check, I think it's 1993.
Okay.
And at that point, Felipa Anzalone had been appointed director over at Northeastern. And I had known Felipa for a long time and always thought she was great. And she needed an associate, and it was the next step for me, so I went over and joined Felipa. And it was an interesting time because at that point the law library was pretty, I would say it wasn't really funded very well, and it wasn't very, it had some problems. And so Felipa had been brought in to try to fix it and turn it into something, more akin to a law library that works well. And so
Mhm.
we had, we spent a lot of time building up the collection and hiring reference librarians and working with the faculty to make the teaching component more useful.
Mhm.
And I was there for about 10 years, and Northeastern was a wonderful, wonderful place to be. It was a great law school with the co-op program where the students go and work on quarters. They work outside in a real job, and then they come back to school.
Mhm.
And so I also taught on the side. I started the first moot court program. I was the moot court director
Mhm.
for their first moot court program, and I also taught their first appellate advocacy class because they were sort of a non-traditional law school, and so they hadn't had these sort of more traditional classes like moot court. And so as more students came in and the law school got a bit stronger, they wanted these sort of classes. And I was fortunate the dean said, would you like to teach these classes? And I said, yeah, this is great.
Deans often really want people to teach. It's one of their problems is getting enough coverage for the classes.
No, absolutely. And I wasn't, it was an adjunct job. I wasn't a full professor, but it was great. And it was.
We all know you work as hard as a regular professor, at least in classroom, and you're paid a tad bit less. Yes.
But I got such good experience, and I loved the students. The students were just great, and the professors at Northeastern were wonderful too. It was just a really nice, small, cohesive, and collegial kind of place at the time. So I stayed there for 10 years.
Yeah. Well, it must have been you were enjoying life, and of course, Philippa is such a wonderful person.
Right.
I imagine an excellent director to have.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun.
Yeah. Now, we started stepping back just a tad in the story. You were a legal aid attorney for a number of years before you decided to perhaps become a law librarian. Can I ask about that process, how you decided to become a law librarian, and more particularly, did anyone play a role in that?
Actually, yes. I have a very good friend. In fact, she's probably my best friend, who I went to college with. And she is a public librarian in Iowa City, Iowa. And so when I was in law school, she was in library school. And I kept watching what she was doing in library school, and I thought, I wish I was in library school. And so my friend Maeve Clark is her name, Maeve was probably the person who most convinced me that I would like to go the library route. And I had known some other people who had gone that route too. And so when I started thinking about it, I just looked at two schools. I looked at Michigan and I looked at Illinois. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate that Illinois was able to give me a full assistantship because a legal services lawyer doesn't make much money. So
my daughter used to be one. She's now working in the real world and making a little bit more
money.
Not a lot,
yeah.
But more. Yeah.
Oh, when I was so this is kind of funny. When I became a law librarian at Pappas, I doubled my salary from when I was a legal services attorney.
Yeah. I think the perception is that we're all not paid very well in libraries, but we don't do too badly, do we?
No. And, it was hard at first coming to Boston from Iowa or from Missouri. It's so expensive here. But
and I imagine the traffic on the streets is another turnoff to living here. I've had to contend with that yesterday and earlier today. But
I drive just like a Bostonian now.
I had to. I had to revert yesterday to my way of driving when I lived in the Washington, D.C. area.
Yeah.
I wanted to change lanes, and this guy started to pull up. Well, I got over.
Yep.
Almost as well in that maneuver as the cab drivers.
Yeah. You just don't look. Don't look at the other driver. Just go.
And you hope he doesn't want to wreck his car, even if he would love to wreck yours. For
exactly.
Doing that. Yes. So you had a guidance into our field, and you've now. We've talked about your first couple of jobs as a law librarian.
Yep.
Do you count anybody? You've mentioned a couple of really good people, but do you count either of them or anybody else as a mentor?
Oh, in the law library world. Well, honestly, I think the mentor that I learned the most from is John Palfrey, who I met here at Harvard, and he became my boss after I'd been here for a while, and he is not a law librarian.
I know, yeah.
He's a lawyer, but he's a library. He's learned so much about libraries, and now he's quite the library advocate, and has created the Digital Public Library of America and done many, many other things. And I would say, even though I'm not twice his age, but I could be his older babysitter, and I've told him that many times. He taught me so much about just taking ideas and moving them forward, and how valuable libraries can be, and what you can do if you think broadly. And I had, when he came here to work, I had sort of done the management, I'd gone up the levels of management. And as I told you, I sort of was an art person from the beginning, and I'm more a creative person than a practical one. And I said to John, I've always done the management thing, I've gone up the ladder, and it's fine, but I don't feel like I'm really contributing or doing what I should be doing. And he said, why don't we create this lab here in the law school and in the library, and you run it, and we can do really creative, new, cool things that make libraries better. So I had never had a boss who had that much faith in me. Not that my bosses didn't have faith in me, they all did.
Maybe they just didn't express it quite
Right.
that way.
And I said, me? And he said, of course, So it was that was just, I feel like he was so supportive of me, and he really gave me this ability to move forward that I don't think I ever had before. And so I would say, of all folks, he's my number one mentor.
Well, that's interesting. I would have guessed somebody a little earlier in
Yeah,
your career,
yeah.
but
they were
works
all
the way it
wonderful
works.
people. Yeah, they're all wonderful people. Dan and Marlene and Philippa and all those folks, they were great, and I learned so much from them. And Terry Martin, too, when I got here. So
it sounds like, Kim, you've got about 2 day jobs. Could you tell us a little bit about both of them and what's going on? I'm especially interested in that lab. This is my first encounter with anybody with such an operation.
It's unique. Well, let me go back just so I fill in all my dot my I's and cross my T's. So when I came to Harvard in 2003, and Terry Martin was the director then, and I came in as the associate director for the reference side of the house. So I had reference, I had special collections, I had circulation, and all that sort of thing. And it was amazing just coming to Harvard with everything that we have here. I came from Little Northeastern, and I come to this place where the riches are just beyond belief.
Smaller Northeastern.
Smaller.
Not exactly tiny.
No, not exactly tiny. It's a pretty big school now.
Yeah.
But coming to this operation, it was amazing, and our students are just amazing. And so I was engaged at the beginning in the legal research and writing and all that sort of thing. And then Bob Buckwalter, who you will be interviewing later on this afternoon, was the head of collections at the time. He was the associate librarian for collections, and he retired. And after Bob retired, I took on the collections side of the house as well. And that was really interesting because I'd always really been interested in collection development. And then Terry retired, and we had a reorganization here at the library, and John Palfrey was appointed director, and that was when Elena Kagan was our dean. So she had done, sort of a study of the library, and there were certain things that came out of the study, and essentially they wanted the library to be a little more user-focused. And I think Harvard had a tradition of being a little bit more collection-focused than user-focused, and so we had a reorganization. Palfrey was hired. We had a reorganization of the library, and it was pretty much bottom up. He appointed 9 of us from the library. Half of us were union, and half of us were professional. Some of us were from tech services, some of us were from research services, and we all got together in this room and spent 6 months together with a facilitator, Maureen Sullivan, who has worked a lot in the library world and who's a wonderful person.
I've been to some of her sessions.
She's just great.
Good.
She's really good. And we also had some outside folks who advised us, Sharon Hamby O'Connor, who was the law librarian at BC and another wonderful person. And do we have Bob Baring? He might have done something. Might have.
He started here.
I know he
In the
did.
Salad
He was here.
days. The first time I met him was a visit here.
Yeah, Bob was here. Anyway, we came up with this new organization, and it was we submitted a report, and it went to the dean, and the organization essentially tried to make us sort of more user focused, but it also, we were able to become more efficient in the tech services area, which is what libraries are doing now, right? And we were able to open up some lines where we could build this lab. And this lab, which is known now as the Library Innovation Lab, at the time was, we were calling it the Digital Lab. And this was the brainchild of John Palfrey. And what he said was, he was always disappointed that libraries we didn't create Google, we didn't create Wikipedia, and he was worried that we were ceding our expertise to outside folks. And he said, I want libraries to be as wonderful in the digital age, or he called it digital plus, in the digital plus age as we've been in the analog age. And so that was sort of the mantra that we were chanting as we went forward on this lab. And at first the lab was teeny weeny. I mean, it was myself as the librarian. We had another sort of techie librarian with us, and we had a regular web developer who had worked in our IT. And then John had an idea, and he'd say, let's try this, and then we would try it. And so that's kind of how it started. And as we started doing bigger projects, the lab grew. And as folks, retired and moved on, we were able to move around positions. And so we were able to create, I guess one of our first biggest projects was something we call Shelf Life. And we called it Shelf Life then. It's now called Stack Life. But what it was it was a virtual browser, a book browser of everything that Harvard owned. We have 14 million items in our catalog. We have 73 libraries. Half of our collection is 42 miles away and in high density storage. So there's no way anyone could browse the Harvard collection, A to Z if you wanted to. It's impossible. In our software, Stack Life, we represented those items in a long virtual browser. And so you could just click on one and you would be able to get its information, or if it was available full text, you could get it as well. But the other thing we did with that is we were interested in not just the collection, but how's the Harvard Library using the collection? So one of the things that we were always talking about is what is Harvard reading? What is a faculty member? What does Alan Dershowitz read? Or what does Lawrence Tribe read? And you can't just, go into their office and look around. And so what we did is we decided we would heat map that collection and according to how often the item was used. And so we assigned points, which is this is kind of a little creepy, but we gave, if an item was borrowed by a faculty member at Harvard, it got 3 points or something like this. If it was a graduate student, 2, and an undergrad 1, that's still a little bit collapsed.
I suppose the intense potential use you think it's getting would be different.
Yeah, and so we heat mapped it so that when you click on an item in the Shelf Life application, the darker the color shows more the use. And that system is still used here at Harvard. It's part of the array of options on our Harvard Library portal. So if you want to use Hollis, our online catalog, you can use it, but you can also use Stack Life. So that was our first big project. And then we did some other spin-off projects. And we went around and talked a lot about what libraries should be doing. And the funny thing about the lab, that's always been funny, but we've been very fortunate, is we were talking about libraries sort of in a larger framework, not just law libraries, but we were sitting in a law school, in a law library. So it was, we always had to say, well, libraries are libraries, right? Whether it's law or not. And we were fortunate that we had really supportive deans who thought this is a good thing for the law library to be doing. And now John Palfrey left, unfortunately, and he's now the head of school at Phillips Andover Academy.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
Yeah,
And,
that was a huge loss.
even his initial appointment was sort of disquieting to some of our colleagues.
Oh, I know. We went through.
Probably some of them that thought they should have the job or something.
Exactly. Yeah. That was not a. I was disappointed in some of the things I heard said about him because most people didn't know him.
It sounds like he was gifted. I mean,
he was fabulous. Yeah.
I mean, the academy where he is now must really be benefiting.
Yeah, and one of the things he did is when he came in, he said, "I'm not a librarian. I'm relying on you and my team." And he goes, "I want to learn as much as I can." And he literally went and sat with everyone on this staff, and he learned how to catalog a book. He watched.
Basically, you ran a library school for him.
Yeah, everybody and everyone.
Sorts.
Yeah, it was and we all knew that it was a controversial appointment, but honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better.
That wasn't
a better
your
mentor.
responsibility to worry about,
Right,
nor
right,
his.
right,
I mean,
right.
others made those strategic decisions.
And Harvard has always been a little, shall we say, Harvard-ish
Yeah.
about who is going to run their library. And now we have another law professor running our library, and that's Jonathan Zittrain. So I report to Jonathan, and Jonathan is, the model is a little bit different now. He is not as engaged in the library as John Palfrey was. We have an executive director now who runs the day-to-day things, and that's our my new colleague, Jocelyn Kennedy, who just started. And then I run the collections and I run the lab. But Jonathan Zittrain, again, is another amazing idea guy. And so he's been keeping the lab busy with a lot of his ideas. And he's much more legal focused. So we've done a lot of projects now that are focused on, one, our CAP, Case Law Access Project, where we're digitizing all the case law, is one of our big projects now. And then we have another project that combats link rot called perma.cc, and that has become a very, very popular project that now is being used by the courts. It's being used by almost all the law schools in the U.S. We got a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services to broaden PERMA to make it available to all academic institutions, as well as to make a commercial version of it, because there's a lot of folks out there, publishers, lawyers, who would like to be able to use PERMA to preserve their citations to the web. And so we're quite busy.
I imagine you're busy. Now, you had mentioned, again off camera, that you are actually sending some of the materials that you have digitalized to permanent storage of some sort?
Permanent storage,
in
yes.
the salt mine.
In the salt mines, yes. So we have one of the largest collections, or the most comprehensive collections of case law of all the libraries in the U.S., except for maybe Library of Congress, but of all the academics. So we decided several years ago that we were able to come across or get access to a high-speed digital scanner that does amazingly fast scanning. And so what we did is we decided we were going to digitize those cases and make them available to the public for free. So we use this high-density scanner, and in order to use such a scanner, you have to chop the books. So we take the books, we get the metadata from them, we chop the bindings, we put them in a guillotine. There's a guillotine that actually cuts them and makes them perfect. And then we feed those through the scanner. And then at the end, they get shrink wrapped back. And we actually use shrink wrap like like you would do for meat or something at the grocery store. And then we put those back in the bindings. We don't sew them back in, but they're back in the bindings. And then they get shipped off.
So they stay intact. In
an exact order.
Old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
Bound.
And then they go to the salt mines in Kentucky, where they will live for the rest of their life. And if there's any reason that we need to fetch them, if someone thinks this is, the digital surrogate is not authentic, we would bring that back, but we don't expect that to happen.
It was interesting the other day, one of the benefits of traveling around and seeing people is I did get to visit the Hein Company, and I watched the production for Hein Online,
Yeah.
where they digitalize PDF format. And they actually did have a machine where they had to cut the binding apart. But so many of the source documents that they used, books were from libraries that weren't too keen on having that happen.
No.
They had some fairly sophisticated ones for doing the pages without having to
Without
cut
having
the
the binding,
book.
yeah.
But yet they could get all the way into the by the binding.
Right.
And
And we have those, we put our rare books, or any of the reporters that are rare, we run through a different process. We
Yeah.
won't disbind them. And we work with Hein. We've worked with Hein over the years on projects, as with some of the other companies too, because we have such a wonderful collection. We've been able to work with partners in the commercial world, Hein and Cengage Gale, to digitize some of our materials and then make those available on some of their platforms. So they've been good partners.
Well, I appreciate your so much detail about this rather interesting and very innovative undertaking with this lab and some of the other things you do. One thing I haven't really gotten into is some of your service to the profession more broadly. I know you've served as a speaker on some of these same topics at a variety of places. Is there any of that that you would like to talk about?
Well, I've been, in the last few years, I go around and talk about the lab a lot. And I have been, I talk about particular projects like PERMA. We go around and talk to our fellow law libraries because they're our partners in that.
Yeah.
I've also talked more in general about the bigger library issues to folks beyond the law library world. So I was really fortunate a couple of years ago to be able to go to Berlin and meet, along with some other librarians from the U.S., and meet a number of German librarians. And they invited me back last year to talk about the innovation lab that we're doing here, and that was wonderful.
Imagine it was very interesting for you, but also rewarding.
It was
This is your baby as much as anybody else's.
Yeah, it was, and you know, everyone, librarians all around the world, we're really anxious, and we really want to do, we want to bring the best that we have. We know how to do this stuff. We just need to, put ourselves out in front and say, let's do this. So the Germans are really keen on innovation and doing different things in their libraries. So that's fun. I've been to Canada and talked with the Quebec Librarians Association. I've been down to American University and spoke to their folks.
Institution I think I was part of.
Yes.
Actually, I still am
Yeah.
as an emeritus.
Yeah, they have a nice scholarly communications program, and they bring speakers in. So that's been a lot of fun. And, we, especially now with our PERMA, our web archiving project, because we got this money from the IMLS, we now have to go pretty much around the country and say, introduce PERMA to the non-law library world, and convince them that web link rot's a problem for all of us, and get on board with PERMA. So that's been fun. And we've also done some really fun meetings and talks with judges, because the world of the courts is very interested in preserving link rot. So I've been at the state Reporter of Decisions conference and talked about things, and worked with some of the local judges here in Massachusetts on some of these things. So it's really fun to get involved in the real world in that kind of way.
I imagine it is. Now I realize you have a meeting coming up in a few minutes,
Yeah.
so but before we get to that, I'd like to ask if there's anything that we have not talked about.
I just think it's really wonderful, and I want to thank you and Hein and the folks in AALL for doing this, because especially as a former AALL intern at the archives, I think it's
That's
really
right.
great.
You are the right person for me to dare come and talk to.
We need more of this, and I love hearing the stories and the folks that came before me, and hopefully the folks.
Well, I appreciate the kudos, but it is so fascinating and exciting to be part of this.
Yeah.
I really enjoy what I'm able to do now, and but I thank you anyhow.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I also want to thank you for being part of today's session. our conversation, because it will be an important part of our repertoire of stories, part of the Hainan line. And in thanking you, I'm not just thanking you on my behalf, but also on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Kodak, and of course Dick Spinelli, our colleagues with whom I have the pleasure of working to produce this oral history.
Thanks.
Thank you.